World Insight coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, Turkey declares a state of emergency amidst the chaotic aftermath of last week's attempted coup, arresting and sacking thousands and more to rein in control of the nation. Will law and order be restored in that country? And Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May returns home after talks in Germany and France with mounting pressure to kick off the official Brexit process as soon as possible. But how much time will Britain need? We start today's show in Turkey, where Parliament has approved a 3-month state of emergency following last weekend's failed military coup. Turkish President Erdogan said this would allow his government to take swift and effective measures against the supporters of the coup. This has brought mixed reactions both domestically and internationally. Take a look.
346 in favor and 115 opposed. Turkish parliament votes 3-1 approving a 3-month state of emergency starting from Thursday. The president and cabinet are now allowed to bypass parliament in passing new laws and to limit or suspend rights and freedoms as they deem necessary.
This practice is absolutely not against democracy, the rule of law and freedoms. Quite on the contrary, it has the purpose of strengthening and protecting these values.
Under the state of emergency, security personnel will have expanded rights to search people. Enforced curfews and suspended gatherings are possible. Turkey will also suspend its membership in the European Convention on Human Rights. Some fear the new decree will lead another blow to the country's already weakened economy, especially the tourism industry.
All the Istanbul, we lost around 50%. And not the number only, as a prices, this goes down. Last year when we're talking around 100, 130 euros, now we are talking around 40, 50 euros for Istanbul, 4-star, 5-star hotel. We was expecting so many Russian and Israeli people will visit us, but now we lost them also.
The state of emergency comes amid Erdogan's efforts to rebuild the military, reintroduce the death penalty, and widen investigations into the failed coup. According to official data, more than 10,000 people have been detained. The depth and scale of the purges have raised concern among Western allies.
It's important, moving forward, that the democratic institutions that were critical to the success in repelling the coup emerge stronger than ever.
On the streets of Istanbul, supporters of Tayyip Erdogan all rallied in support of the government's declaration. Still, some others worried about personal consequences. The Turks may stand united against the coup, but appears to be divided in the future.
And for more about what exactly is going on in Turkey and what's likely to happen there, we are joined here in the Beijing studio, Mr. Hua Liming, who is a distinguished fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Ambassador Hua is also former Chinese ambassador to Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and the Netherlands. Welcome, Ambassador Hua, to our program. Meanwhile, joining us from Washington, D.C., in the United States, we're having Joshua Walker, transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund, also a former senior advisor at the U.S. Department of State. Welcome as well. In Brussels, we're joined by Mr. Peter Klepp, who is the head of the Brussels office of Open Europe. Welcome, sir. So, to the three of you, we have noticed state of emergency, 3 months at least, likely to be extended if needed. That is coming from the Turkish government. Mr. Klepp, what do you make of it, as the EU has already expressed a concern about this?
All the concerns expressed by the European Union, I would say, are valid. It's incredibly important that the state of emergency is as short as possible. It's important that Turkey does not backslide further into authoritarianism. Eventually, for the development of the Turkish economy, to have the rule of law and democracy, and not to have a system whereby the government can arrest people at will, is very important for the future of the country.
I see.
That said, I think there should be a bit of understanding for the reaction of the Turkish government, in the sense that there has been a coup and now there's a reaction. And in that sense, the reaction of the US government has been a bit more moderate than the reaction of the European Union.
I see. Mr. Walker, since we talk about the US reactions, what do you make of the reaction so far? Taking note that it was the parliament which has passed this state of emergency with a majority.
Yeah, I think that's important. The trauma inflicted on Turkey when the bridge 1 week ago was kind of captured between Europe and Asia, everyone was worried about a coup. Now everyone's worried about the overreaction. I think the U.S., kind of the State Department and the White House have put out very clear statements. And I think the issue here is everyone wants to see democratic institutions strong in Turkey, but we also need to have rule of law. In every society, there's a balance between the two. And so I think that's what we're watching right now. We have to wait and see. Unfortunately, Turkey sometimes can overreact, but I think that what's happening right now is emotional in terms of the overreaction to what's happening to the coup.
Mr. Walker, if I could go with you, your answer a bit, there seems to be a difference between quote-unquote overreaction and a different purpose of making the country or leading the country to a different direction. So at this moment, what kind of barometers does your capital or experts like you would use to measure exactly where Turkey is and where it's likely to head for?
That's a great question. I think there's a few areas I would look at. How many people have been arrested and detained for actually being part of the coup? Did they kill people? Were they the people executing the orders where F-16s were bombing the Turkish parliament? Number two, who's linked in some way? Given that the Gulen movement has been labeled as the group that has come out and the Turkish government says they have evidence, are they connected in any way? And those people are being suspended and they're also being put on administrative leave and they're losing their jobs. So the large numbers that we're seeing are being suspended and losing their jobs almost as a precaution. They have to go back and fight to see how many of them are actually guilty or not. But the first number, the arrested and detained, is the most interesting. That's the one I'm most focused on. And those numbers are a lot less than the other numbers that we're talking about in the West.
Well, yes, you might want to focus on the first group of numbers, but there are the second group of numbers. Therefore, Mr. Klepp, those who have been arrested, removed from the post, sacked from the positions, and also suspended from their jobs, those are coming from the military, judiciary, ministries, and now it's likely in the central bank and treasury as well. So from your perspective, which set of numbers should we look at? And what are the relations between these two sets of numbers when it comes to the judgment?
Well, probably the government of Erdogan should be really careful not to create potential for more resistance, more division in Turkish society. If you destroy the career of 60,000 people, then you risk some kind of a backlash. It is probably true that the Gulen movement have been somehow, in one way or another, involved in this particular coup, but the Gulen movement exists in Turkey, is very big, and is probably there to stay. So Erdogan will have to work with them. So to destroy the careers of so many people may actually backfire, even if he would only be caring for his own interest.
Well, whether you care about that regime or not, now governed by Mr. Erdogan and his cabinet is one thing. There seems to be other concerns that correlates with the European Union's earlier statement. We can see there's great concern even from the media, I would say from the West, even though I hate to use that term, media from the West. Concerns over Erdogan power, grab, replace, anti-coup unity in Turkey. That was the headline on the Christian Science Monitor from the United States. Meanwhile, The Economist based in the UK writes Erdogan's revenge on its headlines and also says Turkey's president is destroying the democracy that Turks risk their lives to defend. On the contrary, of course, the Turkish government insists the state of emergency is necessary, as it said. Let me come back to you, Ambassador Hua. You've been listening to the other two panelists we have coming from the EU and also from the United States. What do you make of the current stage now in Turkey? From the gut feeling that you have and the longtime ambassador in the region, where is it heading for?
Well, our friends from Washington and Europe, they are concerned about democracy and the human rights in Turkey. But I think for for a strong man like Erdogan, I think that for the time being, his survival is the critical. I think this priority, whatever it is he needs, either by votes, or by force. I think he now it's for him. I think it's time to take any measure. He doesn't care what reaction from the international community will, but he will ensure his survival, his regime survival. So whatever needs, I think for the time being, this is for.
And here
for
comes
Erdogan.
the question, Ambassador Hua, with your answer. That is, what is the end goal of this regime survival? Is it going to be for the people and for a better society, or is it going to be, as some have been concerned about the authoritarian regime or a dictatorship as being portrayed in the media reports a lot these days? What do you think it would be its nature?
Erdogan has been the leader of Turkey for 14 years.
That's right.
I think in the
From
first
prime minister now moving to the president.
for the beginning years he was prime minister, and he did serve the country. I think he improved the economy and made the infrastructure of Turkey and made a very good international image of Turkey. But later on, especially after 2010, I think his political ambition is so large that he he divided road between him and Gulen, and Gulen and his movement. So that's because his priority is to become the permanent leader. After serve the country for 10 years as prime minister, he wants to be the actual president. He was the real leader of this country.
And here comes the danger, Mr. Walker. If the SOE, or state of emergency, being used, for example, during the state of emergency, according to the law, is that the government, both the president and the cabinet, can enact a law without having the permission or approval of the parliament. They can also limit and also in a way suspend the freedom and actions from anyone that they feel necessary without the parliament approval either. So if that is the case, is there a danger that the constitution could be changed during this process? If not this 3 months, what about the next suspension?
Yeah, let's be clear. Given the fact that this was a overwhelming majority, as you said, 3-1, that voted for this, the parliament and the people feel that this is necessary to root out. You're right that this 3-month, we don't know what this looks like. This is in some ways unprecedented for the major cities, but it's very normal in other parts of Turkey. There are 20 provinces in the southeast by Syria that have been on this state of emergency from the beginning because of the fight against the Kurdish areas. Turkey has had 17 terrorist attacks in the last 7 months alone. So Turkey is at a state of war. The question is now it's at a state of war with itself. And will the Constitution change? As your Chinese guest rightly pointed out, President Erdogan has ambitions to change Turkey from a parliamentary to a presidential system. This seems like a good time to do it, but I would predict there's going to be an election before he does it, because he's a very clever politician who likes to win elections to have what he needs.
But it's interesting that you're using his past records to predict about the future he's likely to project with the state of emergency. But the question is, we are having a coup now, at least apparently a coup, and therefore the president and his cabinet can pretty much justify whatever they want to do with the coup. So what you use as the past record to justify the future, is that going to be really the case in the future? That would be the big question, Mr. Walker. Very briefly from you, sir.
Yeah, you're right. This is unprecedented for Erdogan, but it's not unprecedented for Turkey. There have been many coups in the past, but none of the coups failed as spectacularly as this one. So now Erdogan, in his own words, has been given a gift to use this for whatever intentions he has moving forward, and we'll have to wait and see how this plays out.
So here comes the issue. What if it goes to a direction that most of the world is concerned about? Mr. Klepp, is the EU and also the EU's ally, for example, the United States, ready about that? Do you have preparations? What if things go a different direction?
Well, there's definitely a big concern given Turkish status as a NATO member that Turkey would go more into the direction of Russia, that they would become more authoritarian. Now, what's going on now in Turkey is really Erdogan trying to purge the whole Gulen movement, for example, out of the army. Now many of the Islamists within the army were actually from Gulen, not from AKP, from his own party. So in the future, if Erdogan would go the authoritarian route, he will have to face an army with a lot less Islamists, ironically, after he has been purging the Gulenists. So I don't think it will be so easy for Erdogan to do that as many think, and in a way it's now a sign of weakness what he's doing now. But if he really thinks at his own long-term interests, it's good for Turkey to be stable, and therefore Erdogan needs to accept that he needs to allow a balance of power in the country. Otherwise, he will eventually face his downfall one way or another.
Ambassador Hua, this is a quite complicated situation. Many outside might not necessarily understand what exactly going on. People would take a military coup as a military trying to take hold of the nation from the civilian government. But actually, military inside Turkey throughout history has been secularist, even though they could be called hardcore secularists. And yet, the regime inside Turkey these days have been going more to the religious state rather than a secular state. So here comes the issue. Gulen is also used to be the partner, in a way, close partner of Mr. Erdogan when he was not yet the president, fighting together with Gulen for the power. So it's much more complicated than what just the military vis-a-vis civilian government, it seems.
There's been a long tradition in Turkey, modern history, that military played his important role in Turkish politics. And I think since 1960s, military made four coup d'etats, but all the coup d'etats, they were successful. But this time, the coup d'etat was not made by the secularists. This time, the coup d'etat was made by the Gulenists.
According to the Erdogan government.
Yes, yes. Actually, not the secular people. They are made this coup d'etat. So that's why Erdogan said that this is a gift from Allah.
Interesting. Even the word he used.
Yes.
There could be different kinds of interpretation about that, Ambassador. Let me come back to you, Mr. Walker. At this moment, we have heard that the Turkish side talked about a commission the U.S. proposed to set up about the extradition of Mr. Gulen. Yet we also know, by public information, Secretary of State Mr. Kerry said earlier there has to be much more hard evidence to suggest Mr. Gulen's role in the coup before he will be extradited or U.S. taken any action. So what do you think about the U.S. role this time? And the controversy about Mr. Gulen, eventually, what it will be like?
You know, unfortunately, as an American who's a friend of Turkey, I think we're in for a rough ride ahead of us. The fact that Mr. Gulen is a Turkish citizen that has an American green card that lives in the U.S. puts America and U.S.-Turkish relations right in the center. As you said, Secretary Kerry said, give us legitimate evidence for a court of law, and we will send them back. The Turks said, we will do that. We don't know yet if they have that, but I would be very surprised if there's any direct evidence with Mr. Gulen on the phone call to a general saying, make the coup happen. It's going to be much more circumstantial. And from the Turkish side, that's legitimate. That's exactly what's needed. Everybody in Turkey believes that the Gulen movement was part of this. There's a little bit of skepticism, but we go along with it. The U.S. government's in a very awkward situation because a demand has been made, a treaty has been invoked. Now we have to deal with this. And the question is this about one man or about the broader U.S.-Turkish relationship that are now holding hostage to this one individual?
Before we go, Ambassador Hua, final question for you briefly, if you can, sir. The question is not only about what exactly is happening inside Turkey and where the country is heading for. It is also about how much the rest of the world would go with whatever Turkey has chosen as a road, or even whatever President Erdogan has chosen as Turkish road in the future. And therefore, there's the issue of double standard. Do we bear it with a quote-unquote deeply flawed democracy, no matter what it is? Or do we go with a country that is likely to be a secular state and likely, though, could be military controlled, or to be other options when it comes to government? So here is the issue, the most important issue, Mr. Ambassador.
I think the way, the political model created by the Kemal Atatürk, the 100 years before, has finished already. I think since Erdogan became the prime minister, he gradually changed the system of Turkey, and the military and the secularists are no more playing the very critical role in the political life in Turkey. So today, I think with this coup we have observed, I think Turkey is no more the Turkey that Kemal Atatürk made 100 years before. It will, I think, it has two roles. Turkey will be a one-man state or other kind of the political model. I think that the model will be changed.
All right. Of course, in China, we always believe not to interfere in others' internal affairs. However, it is important that we understand what is going on in the internal affair of the others and therefore have the right reaction. Thank you so much, Ambassador Hua Liming, Mr. Joshua Walker, Mr. Peter Klepp. Really appreciate the gentlemen for being with us. Have a great weekend. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Prime Minister Theresa May from the UK pushed back Britain's exit from the EU, even as pressure mounts from Germany and France to kick off official Brexit talks soon. Will Britain give in? Let's now turn to Britain's new Prime Minister, Theresa May. She just took her first foreign trip to talk with her German counterpart and French president. The meetings were all about setting tones for Brexit, establishing personal relations for the new government at a difficult time. After the meetings, Mrs. May bought time for UK, standing by her decision not to trigger the legal process of leaving the EU this year. Before our discussion on the future of UK-EU ties, let's take a look at this.
Paving the way for Brexit. Britain's new Prime Minister, Theresa May, was given a military welcome in Berlin on Wednesday as she arrived for talks with the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, on her first foreign trip as UK leader. The meeting follows Mrs. May's decision to give up the UK's presidency of the European Council next year, as her first concrete action towards Brexit on the European stage. Prime Minister's plans on how to guide the UK out of Europe dominated the meeting.
All of us will need time to prepare for these negotiations, and the United Kingdom will not invoke Article 50 until our objectives are clear. And that's why I have said already this will not happen before the end of this year.
May's German counterpart agreed that Britain may need more time.
From my point of view, it's completely understandable that a few days after the referendum, a few days after a new government in Great Britain is formed, that the government has to first think what are our interests and what exactly do they look like.
Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty gives EU members the right to withdraw from the EU with a strict 2-year deadline from when withdrawal is notified to the EU until the actual withdrawal. Ms. Merkel still insisted there will be no negotiations before the UK formally triggers the withdrawal process. The UK favors access to the EU single market while imposing limits on the freedom of movement within the EU. French President Hollande told May that the UK has the choice of accepting the free movement of EU citizens in return for free trade. He also urged the UK to start the legal process of leaving the EU.
For France, the sooner the better, in the common interest. There cannot be discussions or pre-negotiations before the formal Brexit negotiation, but there can be preparation, and we can understand the UK's newly formed government needs that time. But I repeat, the sooner the better, in the common interest, in the interest of Europe.
For now, uncertainty hangs in the air. What deal the UK secures in Brexit negotiations will directly affect the stability of the European economy and politics. May's trip may have bought more time for the UK, But with elections coming up for both Germany and France next year, 2017 will be a crucial year for Europe.
For more on British Prime Minister Theresa May's visit to Germany and France, and particularly the UK's future with the EU, we are joined in London by Ian Begg, who is the Professorial Research Fellow at the European Institute of the London School of Economics and Political Science. In Berlin, we are having Mr. Timo Lohocki, who is a Transatlantic Fellow of the European Program, the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Mr. Begg, great to have you now. We talk about Brexit right on the eve of it, and it's great to see you again. What do you make of Prime Minister May's ability to make the European leaders not to rush to the Brexit process now?
Well, in one way, they have no choice, because it's entirely up to Britain when to invoke this famous Article 50. If Britain chooses not to do it, everybody else can shout from the sidelines, but they cannot make the process go faster. And I think the reason that Theresa May has opted to delay invoking the article is that, quite simply, when Brexit happened, there was no plan B in government for what it should cover. And her immediate response has been to appoint ministers whose job it is to try to set out an agenda for Britain, to work out how it will separate itself from the EU, and then in parallel to try to work on how deals with other parts of the world will be constructed. A deal with China, a deal with Australia, a deal with the United States. These are all the twin tracks of the agenda that she has to negotiate. The others can say, yes, we want it faster, but there's not really much they can do to force her.
But the question is, Mr. Lohocki, the others don't even say that we want it faster. Apparently, the others just say, okay, we'll go with your flow. Maybe next year, or maybe we don't know what time.
Well, of course, this depends on the national perspective on the matter. The German and the French perspective on that regard differ remarkably. The Germans have no interest whatsoever to have the UK leave the European Union as soon as possible. Germany wants stable relations to one of the most important trading partners for German industry. And in German politics, the Brexit debate is extremely relaxed, very collected, very rational, meaning German politicians have nothing to gain to play with the Brexit debate. However, this is a very different issue in France, where in the next presidential campaign, Hollande is trying to play hard or play hardball on the European Union affairs. And here, he is very interested in showing a hard line, a tough line against Great Britain, and he wants to make use of being a tough pro-European president in his bid for re-election in May 2016. This is very different in Germany. That's why the Germans are far more relaxed than the French in this respect.
Come on, Mr. Lohocki, we have to make clear here. The Chancellor Merkel was pretty much outspoken when the referendum was being passed inside the UK about Brexit. She said as soon as possible. And we don't want to forget either that Germany is playing such a big role these days inside the EU. Some would even say this has been a tug of war between two women now, Mrs. May and Mrs. Merkel. So you can't just brush it off and say, well, maybe Germany, we don't as concerned as the French do about this. This is just not true, Mr. Lohocki.
Well, I'm not saying Angela Merkel is not concerned. German business, German industry, German economics is very concerned. The question is, though, whether this concerns lead German politicians to push Great Britain out of the European Union as soon as possible. Especially because German politicians are so concerned, they want to have this organized, swift, and orchestrated. That's why they have no interest whatsoever to rush this very issue. Angela Merkel has been very outspoken, you're totally right. The UK must leave the European Union, that's for sure, that's not up for debate. But Germany is not in a rush regarding the timing. So there is not a tug of war between Ms. May and Ms. Merkel, not at all. I do think Angela Merkel and Theresa May are both interested in finding a solution which is in the very interest of the European Union and the UK, and they hereby have a special interest in the economic interests. And here time is necessary to sort out this unprecedented legal
Okay.
issue.
Well, time has always been on the Europe side, hasn't it? I mean, after so many years, many issues has not been resolved. There was an urgency of 2 years, and now it seems that things have relaxed as well. Don't take me wrong, Mr. Begg. I'm not pushing anything. I'm just asking you whether the timetable is still the timetable, Mr. Begg.
Well, there are two aspects to the timetable. The first is when the button is pressed to start the race. That's the invoking of Article 50. And then there's a 2-year prescribed period, which, by the way, can be extended. That wasn't made clear in your package, by agreement of all parties. What's going to happen next is that Britain will be very carefully trying to formulate what it wants. Both sides, I think we should be very clear on this as well, both sides have an interest in doing it as quickly as possible, because the spirit of uncertainty that hangs over both the British economy and the European economy is something that nobody wants and is in nobody's interest. It risks being a kind of lose-lose game if you prolong it too much. However, once you invoke Article 50, it's a prescribed process, and one which doesn't allow much deviation apart from the possibility of extending it. And that's why you want to get it right when you start on it, so that you're not then sidetracked into things which have to be negotiated differently from the main divorce negotiations.
Right.
It's a messy process.
It is a messy process.
I think both sides understand this.
Yes, it is a messy process. That's why it's becoming extremely interesting, an intellectual process in a way. But let me ask you, Mr. Begg, having said what you just said, the right timing, what exactly is the right timing you are referring to? Is it the right timing about doing the negotiations, or is it the right timing for the politicians? Because we understand there's likely to be 2 elections next year for both France and Germany, and not to mention Mrs. May is not likely to have a whole term. She's rather having limited time for this term. So what kind of right timing are we talking about here? Will this generation of leaders just postpone whatever it is necessary to the next and kick the ball down the road rather? Well,
I think what you've already heard is correct, that François Hollande is facing elections next spring. He faces an insurgency from his right wing, the National Front Party, led by Marine Le Pen. And he wants to show that he's tough enough in negotiations to be trusted by the French people. I don't think it's going to work for him, because his rating is already so low that he is unlikely to be able to recover enough to be the prime candidate. Nevertheless, France does not want to encourage this populist party, the National Front. And that is one of the big considerations for France. For Britain, it's different. I don't think Theresa May is either accelerating or decelerating the timetable for her own direct political gain, because she's in post, if she wants it, till 2020, which will be well beyond the 2 years. What she's concerned about is being able to construct a British position that makes sense.
Right. What about construct the German position? What about construct the EU's position? Mr. Lockey, do you think what is the right timing, or the right timing can be forever postponed?
Well, I entirely agree with Mr. Bergman, his deliberations. I do think that the French push for this because of the elections lurking, where the European political issue is of prime concern to French voters. However, for the German election in September 2017, European issues play a very, very minor role, and the German far right is extremely, well, it's far less important than in France. It might even cease to exist up until next autumn. That means that domestic power play doesn't play a great role for the German Chancellor. Though I think she will just wait out until Theresa May, as Mr. Burke said, has figured out what Great Britain really wants. And after she knows what Great Britain really wants, what they put on the table, she will try to forge a reaction, a German reaction, which is trying to combine the interest of all European countries. However, what's pretty clear is the German positions is largely interested in keeping the UK as closely as possible to the common European market, to make sure exports and imports between London and Berlin continue to flow as swiftly as possible.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Mr. Begg, even though the counterparts could have different opinions, what about internally for Mrs. May? She was elected, or not elected, rather selected, after the referendum of Brexit.
Chosen.
And she is supposed to be there to implement so-called the will of the people. So can she endure these kinds of delay, if we could use the word, And will the people, quote unquote, allow her to do so?
Well, to be blunt about it, the people don't have much say at this point because it's up to the government and the parliament
That's right.
to take the next steps. However, what Mrs May has to reconcile is one message from the electorate in the Leave vote was, we don't want more migrants. And if she wants to maintain access to the full single market in Europe, that comes with it the obligation to accept migrants from other EU countries. So there's an incompatibility at the heart of this, which she has to find a way around. And that, I think, is what's going to make it very difficult for her to construct a package of trade access, including access, let's face it, for the service industries on which Britain depends very heavily, as well as finding a way to limit migration just enough to satisfy this demand from the British people.
Right.
Now, some would say you cannot have both at once, and that's her challenge.
Well, you might say delaying some time might help to figure out a concrete plan and get everybody prepared. But a delay also means, Mr. Lohaki, uncertainties. And the economy hates uncertainties. The markets hate uncertainties. So what would that mean? The pros and cons of these so-called delay, or let's just wait for the right timing?
Well, to give a very, very cynical reply here, the uncertainty in this respect lies with the British economy, not with the European, and most certainly not with the German economy so much. As long as these negotiations linger or haven't even triggered, the money, the foreign direct investment, will be stopped in the direction of Great Britain, in the direction of the UK. As long as the negotiations take, the more investors which are interested in Europe will refocus their energies or their interest to other Eurozone markets, first and foremost Germany. So in this respect, Germany is not in a hurry at all. That's why, basically, as you know, the financial market, the financial place of Frankfurt is benefiting from, as longer as these negotiations take, the money will flow to Germany as long as investors do not know how Great Britain wants to strike a bargain between the migration challenge, as Mr. Berg pointed out, and the access to the free market. And to make this very, very clear, as much as Germany, the German Chancellor, is interested in keeping the UK as closely to the European market as possible, there will be no chance to get access to the European market without ensuring the free movement of people within the European Union.
All right.
And we're making it clear, this is not to be negotiated.
Okay, Mr. Begg, even though you're not coming from Mrs. May's cabinet, but you probably have to solve the problem, as Mr. Lohaki just pointed out. There's no way that you could have the advantages without really paying, quote-unquote, the price or also shouldering the responsibilities. Mr. Begg.
Well, I think one of the lessons politicians learn very early is never say never, because there's always going to be some compromise that can be constructed. So they will be searching for a formula, a softening of something here or there, maybe what's been called an emergency brake on migration as one kind of way of dealing with this. But I think that there are more fundamental questions, which is it's not just a problem for the British economy. We've already seen the great difficulties of Italian banks, which have been aggravated by the uncertainty around what's happening with Brexit. Even that German institution, the Deutsche Bank, has some difficulties at present. So financial instability in Europe would be caused by extending the Brexit uncertainty. So let's not pretend that Germany is immune from this.
All right. And before we go, we do have a very important question that I need to throw out to these two gentlemen. That is, what about these two ladies? I mean, for the very first time in Europe history, I mean, at least over the past few decades, that one very important question about the continent's fate is likely to be in the hands of two ladies, of course, with the help of the cabinets on their own. But what do you make of this chemistry between these two ladies? Mr. Begg, we've been playing once and again on our screen the shaking hand scene between these two ladies. What do you make of it? Will that be, in a way, sustainable for the future?
Well, I think it will. It's intriguing to look at the parallels between their two backgrounds. They're both the daughters of Protestant ministers. They both have low-profile husbands, they both have no children, and they both enjoy having walking holidays in the Alps during the summer. So I think there's a lot of common ground between them that has been underestimated.
Even the wardrobe could be very different. The working styles seem to be quite similar. Get down to work, roll up the
Yes.
sleeves. Mr. Lahaki,
Oh yes.
your view?
Very, very serious people.
I entirely agree. I mean, I wouldn't pay too much attention to the common history they might share. However, their current working habits, they're very pragmatic, they're very down to earth, they're very well connected. They both had more or less the most important parties within their country, namely the Tories or the Conservatives in Germany, meaning they have the most powerful networks, and they tend to, in stark contrast to other European leaders, base their actions in very rational long-term considerations, which I do think at this very critical, pivotal juncture for Europe is very, very good news for the continent.
Right, and we are running out of time, even though we could have further discussion about this very important topic for a long time. But so far, thank you so much, Ian Beck and Timo Lohaki, two gentlemen, for being with us on a Friday evening. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Really appreciate it. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night, and have a great weekend.